What's up, monster truck fans? Tonight's episode of Monkey Wrench, we're going to do something a little bit. We're going to take it back old school. All right, fans, we're going to talk about the old school monster truck here tonight. You know, we've been talking a little bit about some of the new school stuff, how the new monster trucks work. But what about the old school? Where did we come from? Well, this here is an old school monster truck. Orange Krate was built back in 1991 by Stan Emery. And my dad, Don Borders, helped him a little bit out, got him hooked up with some parts for that. But, you know, it was built back in 91, ran up till the early 2000s, and then it was parted out. This truck we found it in Bentonville, Arkansas. It had been completely stripped, motor, tranny. It was a frame sitting on the ground. We purchased it, brought it back to life. But, you know, old school, man, it's totally different than what it is now. You know, the new trucks, we got the containment seats inside the truck so the drivers can't move. Well, in the old school trucks, they had a suspension seat in them. Underneath the seat is a web design that actually suspends and takes some of that impact. You had to do that because these trucks had no suspension. You know, you were dealing with trucks now that's got 26 and 30-inch travel suspension. These trucks had maybe 6. But, you know, it's a lot different. You got padding inside. Why do you have to have all this padding? Well, because you're bouncing around inside the cab. You know, most of the drivers, they held their arm out the window and try to drive these trucks with one hand. And, you know, hats off to them guys. Them guys were amazing. They were great drivers back then. But you can see up in here, this is all Lexan inside here. That's how the drivers drove these trucks. They literally looked through the floor to see where they were going once they quit driving with their arms out the window. You know, Orange Krate's definitely an old school truck. This thing has been around a long time. It's taken a lot of abuse, but it's one of our favorites in our fleet. So let's talk a little bit more about the old school truck. Man, nothing beats the sound of steel slamming in the truck right there. You know, no fiberglass here, all American-made steel, 1975 Dodge. What makes an old school old school? Well, you know, the new trucks got the 26-inch travel nitrogen shocks. Old school trucks had leaf springs. Man, the bigger the stack, the more they thought was going to help them out there on the track. You know, this right here is a set of 2.5 leaf springs underneath this trucks that were custom arched for this truck. As I mentioned earlier, you know, these trucks had maybe 6 inches of travel. As you can see, there's nothing between there and the bump stop. This thing had nothing underneath it. Beat you to death. These trucks ran a 5-ton military axle. Now we're running 20-ton Clark axles. These trucks ran 5-ton axles in them. And, you know, no planetaries out here. Later on, the guys converted to planetary. They actually figured out the knuckle on the ball claw inside of a 5-ton and a 20-ton Clark were the same. So they were able to mate a planetary axle onto this, which took a lot of gear reduction into the trucks and helped these trucks out. But man, you can see old school truck, 5-ton axles, leaf springs. Man, you see some of the trucks, they had multiple shocks. Shock. Well, we don't have any shocks on here right now. We actually took them off and we just haven't put any back on here recently. So, you know, they thought more shocks, try to control that spring bounce as much as they could. But you know, these trucks, you drove them a lot differently. It wasn't like the new trucks where you jump and you land and it's nice and smooth. These trucks, they counted the bounces. You know, when they jump and clear a set of cars, it was 1, 2, 3, and they knew exactly how many bounces they had to go until they could make the turn. And it was just a wild and crazy time. But you know, this is the old school setup right here. Like I said, leaf springs, 5-ton axles, steel, big, heavy, thick frames in these trucks. You know, these trucks are made to take a beating, and this has definitely held the test of time. This truck's been around since 1991, so, you know, that's a long time in a monster truck world. So, man, you know what? I showed you the leaf springs underneath the old school truck. What makes an old school different from a new school? Well, we're going to show you right here on the Monkey Business truck. You seen leaf springs on Orange Krate, Monkey Business, 26-inch travel shocks. This thing has 26 inches of suspension travel. These things drop way out, absorb them big, heavy hits. You know, when we get that big, sick air, that's what takes all the abuse right there, keeps us drivers safe, keeps us from having to take the hits. So you see the difference now. Leaf springs, nitrogen shocks. Man, big difference. The monster truck industry has came a long way. But hey, tell us what you guys think. What's your favorite, old school or new school? And which truck is your favorite? Which old school truck did you like the best? You know, I'm kind of partial to old Orange Krate over here, but which one was your favorite? Make sure you like, comment, and share. Check out our page, Monkey Business Motorsports. We'll see you all next time.